They thought it was going to be the kind of day people remember for laughs and stories at backyard barbecues. A day when the neighborhood came together for something fun and adventurous. But they never imagined it would spiral into a nightmare where survival itself would hang by a thread. Karen, the neighbor who always bragged and always wanted to be the center of attention, had convinced half the block to join her on a fishing trip out on the open ocean. She strutted down to the dock that morning as if she owned the sea itself, waving her rod around like a champion and loudly promising everyone that she'd outfish them all. Some rolled their eyes, others chuckled, but no one could deny the excitement of leaving land behind and chasing adventure across the glittering blue horizon. The sun glowed above the calm waters, painting the waves gold as the boat motored farther and farther from shore. Seagulls followed overhead, their calls sharp against the gentle rhythm of the waves. Kids laughed, neighbors chatted, and everyone settled into a rhythm of casting lines, hauling nets, and comparing catches. The air smelled of salt and freedom, and for a while it felt like nothing could go wrong. Karen stood at the bow, daringly close to the edge, her hair whipping in the sea breeze, shouting to anyone who would listen that today she was going to prove herself once and for all. The neighbors let her have her moment, humoring her. But deep down, most of them knew she was reckless. And recklessness on the ocean is never a good thing. Hours slipped by in the sunlit haze of fishing and fun. The nets grew heavy with silver flashes, the buckets filled with the day's bounty, and laughter rang across the deck. Karen kept leaning farther and farther over the railing, determined to outdo everyone else. Each time she pulled up a fish, she shouted like she'd won a grand prize, making sure the kids and adults alike were paying attention. Her pride swelled with every catch, her arrogance thick in the air, and yet beneath that surface something else stirred. Far below the calm waves, hidden in the shadows of the deep, something ancient and powerful circled with patience, sensing the splashing above, sensing the frenzy of fish and humans. The first sign came so subtly that no one paid attention at first. The boat rocking slightly harder than expected. A neighbor thought it was just a swell. Another blamed the shifting weight of the nets. But then the boat lurched again, more violently, enough to send a bucket crashing to the floor and water sloshing over the edge. Confused murmurs spread until suddenly a sharp black fin cut through the water's surface like a knife. Gasps filled the air. Someone screamed the word, "shark," and instantly the joyful mood collapsed into panic. Parents pulled their kids close, eyes wide with terror, while others stumbled backward from the railing. But not Karen. She smirked nervously, insisting it was probably nothing, maybe just a curious fish, but her voice cracked and betrayed her fear. The fin sliced closer, circling the boat in wide, ominous arcs. Neighbors shouted at her to get back from the edge, but she refused, clinging to her pride even as dread settled over everyone else. Then it struck. The shark surged from below, ramming the hull with bone-rattling force that nearly knocked people off their feet. Screams erupted as the boat tilted, water splashing across the deck. Karen shrieked as her fishing rod slipped from her hands and vanished into the sea. The neighbors scrambled for balance, clutching ropes, life jackets, anything they could grab. The shark wasn't retreating. It was hunting. It rammed the boat again, harder this time, scraping along the wood with terrifying power. Karen dropped to her knees, gripping the railing, her arrogance now shattered by raw terror. The neighbors realized this was no longer a fun trip. It was survival. Shouts filled the air as men and women tried to organize in the chaos, some grabbing long poles to fend off the predator, others securing ropes to keep people from falling overboard. Children cried, clinging to their parents as the massive shadow circled again. Another impact sent crates of fish spilling into the sea, the water around them churning red with blood and scales. The shark snapped at the surface, rows of jagged teeth flashing in the sunlight, the sound of its jaws clamping shut echoing like thunder. Karen screamed for help, her voice breaking, her body trembling uncontrollably. At one point she slipped, her foot sliding on the wet deck, and she almost went over the side. Two neighbors lunged forward, seizing her arms and yanking her back just in time before the shark's head exploded from the water in a spray of foam and fury. Gasps turned to shrieks as the predator thrashed against the side, snapping its jaws inches from where Karen had been. Water drenched the deck, making it even harder to stand. People slid, stumbled, and pulled one another upright. Fear clawed at their throats, but they refused to give in. They had to fight. Together, neighbors who only hours earlier had been laughing and teasing each other now stood side by side, gripping poles and sticks like weapons, forming a shaky line of defense. Karen crouched behind them, sobbing, begging them not to let her die. The shark's shadow disappeared again into the depths, and for a moment there was only silence, broken by ragged breaths and the creak of the boat. But everyone knew it wasn't over. The predator was still out there, circling, waiting, hungry. Every second felt stretched, like the pause before a storm. Then the water erupted once more, the shark slamming into the hull with explosive force, rocking the vessel so violently that ropes snapped and nets spilled. The neighbors screamed, gripping each other to keep from being thrown overboard. The shark's tail whipped against the boat, sending a spray of seawater high into the air. Karen wailed, her pride completely gone, reduced to raw fear as she clutched the deck with trembling hands. The neighbors shouted orders over the chaos, their voices overlapping, driven not just by the will to survive, but by the determination to protect her despite her flaws. They had no choice but to work together. And as the shark circled once more, faster and closer than before, its massive shadow cutting through the waves, they braced themselves for the next strike. Knowing that the line between life and death was now razor-thin, the shark circled again, relentless, its dark shadow slicing the waves as the neighbors braced themselves. Weapons in hand, hearts pounding, Karen sobbed on the deck, begging for her life, her pride gone, nothing left but fear. With a roar of water, the predator surged up, slamming the boat so hard that ropes snapped and crates of fish spilled, blood and scales clouding the sea. Karen slipped toward the edge, screaming, but three neighbors lunged and yanked her back just as the shark's massive jaws snapped where she had been. Chaos ruled the deck, but the neighbors refused to give up. They fought together, jabbing poles, hurling crates, waving flares, every strike and every shout pushing the predator back. Blow after blow, minute after terrifying minute, they stood side by side, protecting one another, protecting her. The shark thrashed and struck again, but this time it faltered, wounded and confused, circling wider, slower, until finally, with a furious flick of its tail, it disappeared into the deep. For a moment no one breathed, waiting for it to return. Then silence. Relief swept over them like sunlight after a storm. Neighbors cheered, cried, embraced, holding their children, clutching each other with shaky laughter. All eyes turned to Karen. She sat drenched and trembling, whispering a broken thank you to the very people she had once mocked. They had saved her not because she deserved it, but because they stood as one. As the boat turned back toward shore, the sun sinking into the horizon, they knew this was more than a fishing trip gone wrong. It was a lesson carved into their souls. Pride can sink you, but unity can keep you afloat, even against the fiercest predator of the sea.